Ian Bremmer joining us now on the telephone to react. Ian, what are you expecting from this high-stakes meeting?
Both sides, it seems, want to actually lower the temperature of the relationship a little bit. Putin has accepted protocols in terms of what they're talking about. The fact that, Putin's going to show up first. There's not going to be a joint press conference. I mean, this is being staged to minimize the drama from the American side, and the Russians have accepted all of that. From Biden's perspective, he has said consistently, as has the Secretary of State, that they want to have a more predictable relationship with Russia because China is really the focus, much more important, and it's much more confrontational. And so I really think that this meeting is going to surprise to the upside in terms of the level of cordialness and also the takeaways. I think there's going to be an effort to indeed find some areas of cooperation, particularly arms control, despite the fact that the ongoing relations between the two countries are about as bad as they've been since the early 80s.
Yeah, Steve Forbes, jump in here. Earlier, Putin was interviewed, and he said his thoughts on Biden were that he was a career politician.
Yes, and not in this country, that's not a compliment, and that is, I think Putin knows that very well. And General Keane earlier talked about each leader assessing the other. I think Putin realizes he doesn't have to have histrionics with Joe Biden. For the President Biden has already given him the pipeline, which is an enormous victory. So far, we haven't done much on the hacking side. So I think Putin can lay back, say nice things about climate change, predictability, knowing that he's going to get his way. And so in that sense, you have to ask, what does Joe Biden expect to get out of this thing other than some atmospherics? He's not putting anything hard on the table. No more aid for Ukraine. What's he going to do about the Belarus? What's he going to do about the pressure on Georgia? Things like that, meaningful things. How about really beefing up radio broadcasts inside Russia, Radio Free Europe and old Radio Liberty days? Those kinds of ideas and broadcasts help bring down the Soviet Union. So if Biden is serious, there are things he can do to put pressure on Putin. But I think Putin's just going to lay back and say, let the atmospherics roll, because, by golly, I have this man where I want him.
Yeah, I guess I assume Russia collusion won't be part of the discussion there. But, Ian, what about this idea that the administration has now taken away those sanctions for the company overseeing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? Talk about the importance of that pipeline for Russia. That was a big victory for Russia and its ability to transport gas from Russia to Europe.
Look, it's clearly a problem that the Europeans, particularly the Germans, rely so much on gas from Russia. It gives them more influence, and it reduces the Europeans' willingness to support sanctions. Having said that, the Germans were moving ahead with construction under the Trump administration as they continued to under the Biden administration. And, I mean, there was an assessment inside the State Department and the NSC when Trump was in office, that the only way that this pipeline was going to be stopped was if the Greens took over in Germany. Otherwise, it would be completed. It would be made operational. The Biden administration feels the same way. The difference between Biden and Trump is that the Biden administration and Biden in person is much more concerned about not alienating the Germans, wants more coordination between the U.S. and the EU, more coordination between the U.S. and Germany. And so as a consequence, they decided to not engage in the sanctions directly against the company, sanctions against the ships that are involved in the construction still going on. So, I mean, I get that I don't think the atmosphere, I think that the optics of this are pretty bad because you're making that move that doesn't matter much, but that nonetheless feels like you're giving something to Putin, just as you've got Navalny in jail and all of these hacks going on and the rest. So why would you give that to Putin before the meeting? Like I accept the criticism, but I don't actually think the idea that suddenly the pipeline is going to happen because of Biden's decision, that's just not true. The only thing that stops this pipeline is if the German Greens win to succeed Merkel, and that is highly unlikely, Maria.
But you know, you would think that Putin would approach this differently, as opposed to allowing or watching Russian hackers hack into the United States twice within a couple of weeks before this high-stakes meeting.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's not just twice. This is happening. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we find out that the computer issue that was grounding Southwest Airlines for a few hours was also a ransomware attack from Russia. These are criminal networks that are engaging in attacks with reckless abandon against companies all over the world, except those in the former Soviet Union. And Putin is well aware of it and not doing a damned thing. This is a really tough thing for the Biden administration to respond to. I mean, the one win that we've seen has been the FBI unilaterally going and grabbing the Bitcoin wallet and the $5 million, $4 million in ransom that was paid by the Colonial Pipeline. That's a win. And certainly that does display that the Americans have the ability to take action directly. But that's very different from the Russian government in any way responding to U.S. pressure. And I agree with Mr. Forbes. I think that the United States is going to have to show the Russians that there will be costs that will be exacted upon the Russian government if they continue to allow this.
Yeah, well, we haven't shown that yet, but we'll see what happens in this meeting. Ian, really nice to navigate this with you. Thanks very much for being with us this morning. Ian Bremmer joining us this morning on the telephone. We know that Putin has arrived at the summit site. We are waiting to see the arrival of President Biden.